Hello and welcome to the Astro Garden, a place for astrologers to chat all things astro. I'm your host Janessa of By Jove Astrology. Thanks for tuning in. All right, welcome back to another episode of the Astro Garden. Today I have Lacey with me. Thanks so much for joining me.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, Lacey is a local astrologer. I actually met Lacey at a class at her shop called The Future in Minneapolis. I went to Britton LaRue's Unshaming the Zodiac class there back in August and had the opportunity to also meet Lacey. So yeah, I'm just so happy we're doing this today.
Me too. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. Do you want to introduce yourself a little bit and talk about your background?
Yeah, my name is Lacey Prpic Hedtke. I live in Minneapolis. I'm from Minneapolis. I have a store called The Future, which I've had since 2017. It started as an artist residency and workshop space and project space and evolved into a retail shop. I say it's for witches and weirdos and artists working with magic. I'm an astrologer. I've been into astrology since I was like 12, which I'm sure we'll get into. I've been doing astrology readings for about 5 or 6 years professionally. I'm an artist. I do a lot of public art. I do 19th century photography, and I do processional banners, and I just got into tufting in the past couple of years. I'm totally obsessed with that. Those are kind of my main things. I love snacking and lounging.
Nice. That's so awesome. Yeah, it was so fun coming to your shop. I just love everything about it. And obviously like meeting you was awesome. And then I like scanned your website and like read your about me and I was like, oh my gosh, I need to know like way more about this person. Like so many like different areas of interest that it seems like you have, and some of those are overlapping with mine, so I want to hear all about it. Do you want to like start a little bit like diving in with when you were 12 and like how you found astrology?
Yeah, I somehow got a hold of the only astrology book you'll ever need. I don't know if you remember that book. But I got that book, and also at Walgreens, there used to be those little scrolls, those horoscope scrolls, and they were just generic. But I remember being so into them, maybe because they were in a scroll, so it seemed like more wisdom. But my sister and I got really into astrology, and when my best friend and I were really into astrology, and we'd look up everyone's chart, and that only astrology book you ever need, honestly, is the only one I needed for a long time. It covered a lot of stuff. And I just found it interesting as a way to explain things, explain like why I was the way I was, why other people were the way that they were. I have moon in Aries, and when I was little, my mom got me a book about anger. And then when I found out I had moon in Aries, I was like, oh, part of this is I just have moon in Aries.
That's awesome. My son has a moon in Aries, and it's like very literal too. It's like, yeah, there's the anger. That's so cool though. Like, so you said you're from Minneapolis. That's where you like grew up and
yeah, St. Paul. Yeah.
Oh, nice.
Across
Cool.
the river.
Yeah. It's very, to people not from Minnesota, that makes like no difference, but to Minnesotans, it's like, well, are you really from Minneapolis or is it St. Paul? But no, that's really cool. So you were kind of grew up in a house then, it sounds like, where you were pretty free to like explore that and nurture that.
Yeah. I had an Irish, well, I call her an Irish nanny because it's fancier than saying an Irish babysitter, but she told me and my sister about like hauntings, and she would drive us down Summit Avenue and point out the haunted houses and talk about fairies and crystals. And so she wasn't talking about astrology, but it was definitely like setting the stage for things that are magical. And my mom had a friend who said she was a witch, and my sister and I were both like, oh, a witch. So it was definitely like I grew up with like a single mom in the 80s, so she was like pretty hands off. So I could kind of get whatever into I want. I did get a catalog delivered one time, and she threw it away because she thought it was too mystical or something. And she also got me a Ouija board, but then threw it away, which honestly now I'm kind of thankful. But at the time I was like, you're gatekeeping the spirit world.
No, that's cool. That's super interesting. It's like I'm always so curious to hear like what was going on. I grew up in like a very like Catholic background, like family, so that was like not a topic of discussion. And or it kind of was, it's in like a lot of movies and stuff, so it's kind of like acknowledged that it's like real, but it's also just like not something to explore. So I get to do that now.
Yeah.
And then like, yeah, I'm just so curious about your like art background too. Like there's so many things that you kind of weave together, it seems like if you want to talk about that at all.
Yeah. So since the beginning of time, I was very lucky to go to an arts high school. So I did that my junior and senior year, and then I went to school for art in Boston and focused on photography. And around the same time that I was in art school, my roommate's boyfriend's dad was the pastor at a spiritualist church in Salem, and he was like, oh, to me and my roommate, he's like, you guys are into like ghost stuff, you would like this church. And I never really went to a whole bunch of church when I was little. I went to like Catholic. I mean, I guess I'm Catholic, but we never really talked about it or went to church all that often. So I didn't have any of the church trauma really, but I was also like, church, like, why would I do that? And we started going to this spiritualist church where, like spiritualism is religion of talking to spirits that came about in the 1860s or so. And I was totally into it. And so at the same time that I was learning about photography, I was learning about spiritualism. And there are these spirit photos that I feel like really influenced my aesthetic and idea that like the art we make can be communicating with spirit, or that spirit might be trying to communicate through us through our art, amongst other things. And like there's a lot of crossover, I think, between spiritualism and photography. They were growing up at the same time. They were both trying to prove that something was true based off of like scientific methods. They're both trying to hang on to people or places that are gone. So yeah, I was like doing this. I was going to spiritualist church, talking to spirits. You get like spiritualist healings and messages from spirit, and that felt really like mind-opening. And then yeah, I've just like always been into photography and archives, and I would say in the past like 10-ish years I've gotten more into textile art. My family is from Yugoslavia, and my grandma was like a really good seamstress, and she made all these dresses, and there's all this gorgeous like Yugoslavian embroidery and rug work that I'm really inspired by, but I am not a sewer. I do not like measuring very much. I'm a hot gluer. So I have found a way to be a textile artist kind of in lineage with my ancestors that isn't like painstaking detailed work, even though I would say that it is pretty detailed, but in like in a way that I'm more comfortable with, and not in like a perfection way.
Nice. That's really cool. I feel you on the hot gluing versus the sewing. It's like I can do that, but it's not really how I want to spend my time.
Yeah. Yeah, and I started working astrology into my art. I just had an art show at the Neon Heater Gallery in Ohio that I did 11 banners, one for every planet, including the Earth, of my chart, and then like made a banner for that placement in my chart, and then hung it in the order that my chart goes. Yeah, so I started working more like sigils and magical symbols and procession and ritual into my art. I do a lot of public art, which I see as like public ritual or altars for the public. And I like showing in places that are unregulated or that everyone can see it, whether they know it's art or not, and whether I guess they want to see it or not, it'll be there. Yeah, So that's kind of my art practice.
That's so cool. There's so many layers. I saw that on Instagram, like your banner show, and that was really inspiring. It's something I would never think, like, ideas I would never put together, but I just love how you've been able to like merge all those interests.
Thanks.
Yeah, the spiritualist thing is so interesting to me because I don't know, I never knew much about it. It's something that's only come into like my periphery in like the past couple of years, but yeah, I had the opportunity. My family lives in Florida actually, so
Oh,
I
yeah.
had the opportunity to go to Casadega
Cool.
there. Yeah, it was super cool. Like I'm like all in now. I'm like not all in like practicing, but I'm like very interested in like mediumship and spiritualism and like,
Yeah. Oh, well, let me know if you want to bro down offline because it's so interesting. And I'm excited you got to go there. That's like one of the spiritualist camps I've always wanted to go to.
yeah, I'm definitely going to take you up on that because
Yeah.
I want to hear everything. But cool. Yeah, I also watched a documentary probably 2 or 3 years ago now that I think it's called Surviving Death.
Oh,
Have
yeah.
you seen that?
I just watched an episode about kids who have past life experiences.
Okay.
That's really wild. It's like a mini series, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
And there's some that gets into like the photography and like the trying to document
Yeah.
spirit, and it just that's kind of like what actually sparked I think my interest was like watching that a couple years ago and being like,
Yeah.
there's so much here.
Cool.
Yeah. So have you done like formal astrology education, or is it just something you kind of have taught yourself?
Yeah, I've taken, let's see, how much time do you have? I did a mentorship with Jeff Hinshaw, Cosmic Cousins, like a one-on-one, I think it was 6-month mentorship. I've taken a ton of classes through Astrology University. I've done some classes with Demetra George, one of my faves. Her asteroid workshop really got me interested in the photo asteroids that we were talking about a little bit. I did with Sister Bride, Blair Bogan. She did this is at the beginning of the pandemic. It was like making art with your chart. And then we had an art show. So we like worked on every planet and made art for that planet in our chart, which was like amazing, both astrologically and artistically. So yeah, it's a mix of like lots of workshops plus just like my own reading. And then I've been diving into and trying to define what the photo asteroids mean. So that's kind of my like own study, but yeah, I've done lots of like either short workshops or longer, like month-long workshops.
Nice. Do you have like a specific way of like describing your practice, or no?
Not really, like I'm not specifically an evolutionary astrologer. I'm not specifically like a traditional, I just like take everything that I like, and really the thing that I'm interested in is like, how does astrology intersect with creativity? How can artists use astrology? So that's kind of where I'm more at.
Yeah.
But I've learned from so many different astrologers that I have not fallen into a single category.
That's cool. I feel like that makes it your own. And I think I read that you have started making like sigils like as part of your practice, or what you offer people.
Yeah. So sigil, for everyone who doesn't know, is like a symbol that encapsulates the intention. And so I started using sigils in my artwork. And so I started doing this project where I would do a silver gelatin photograph with tear off photos, kind of like a handyman flyer, but you tear off the photo and it would say, I started it as protection from something, and then I turned it into a spell for something instead of being on the defense. But so it would be like a spell for easy access to hot tubs. And then you take that sentence, take out all of the vowels and repeating letters, and then from the remaining letters, make a design. And then I always draw a circle around it. You can add other little flourishes. If it's a money thing, add some dollar signs, whatever you want to do. And then the idea is that that symbol is the intention, and you can write it on things. You can put it, like you can bake it in, like you can draw it on your baked goods. You can draw it in the air. You can draw it in your mouth and spit it out. You can like do all this different stuff to be like, I'm going to leave this intention here. So for those, I was putting them on photographs, and then the photograph that you take has that sigils intention. I also started using it in the banners that I make. People have asked me to make sigils for them. I actually think it's more powerful if you make your own sigil, just like any sort of magic. Like, I'm never going to care as much as I care. I'm never going to like have as much of the drive to have something as someone else, or to change something as the person who it's actually going to affect. So I'm like always happy to walk people through how to make their own sigil. Anyone can do it. But I do offer that for people who just don't want to do it, or aren't feeling magical that day, or whatever it is. But it's just like, you know, I'm not a drawer, even though I do a lot of like, I guess more like written word in my art. And this is a way to be like, there's no wrong way to do it. And have it feel like the art piece itself has a little spell worked into it.
That's so cool. Yeah, I love that. I just love like that you've kind of crafted your own, I don't know, different ways of offering things. It's like I'm kind of in the earlier stages of my astrology journey, and like thinking about ways of like, how do I find my own voice and my own like niche, or, you know, whatever it is that I am here to offer. So it's fun just seeing people doing it in different ways, and that it can be so different. What else? Do you have any like favorite astrology books or recommendations?
Yes. So I love Demetra George's Finding Our Way Through the Dark. I just keep going back to that one. It's a smaller book, but it's so rich. And I've had a lot of like 12th house. I mean, my moon's in the 12th house, but I've also had a lot of 12th house transits. My progressed moon, I had a 12th, you know, like progressed moon going through the 12th house. I just had a lot of 12th house, like darkness stuff, some Pluto stuff in the past several years, and that book has been really helpful. I also love that, what is it? It's something on the lark, the eagle and the lark. Do you know what I'm talking about? I really loved that one. I'm trying to think what I use a lot or go back to. I mean, I have like a huge astrology library at home. I loved when I was getting more into astrology, Demetra George's Astrology for Yourself workbook. I love a workbook. Those are the ones that are coming to mind. I've recently started learning about geomancy. Do you know what I'm talking about? It's like folk astrology, or like older.
I like know the term, and I've like heard vague things about it, but I'm not an expert by any means. If you want,
I just started learning about that. It's like essentially like geomancy is like asking the earth in a way. And so you like can do it a bunch of different ways. You can roll dice, you can you just have to get numbers that are even and odd, and it's a way of asking a question, but it's somewhat related to astrology in that like you're kind of working with like houses, and the different symbols relate to the different planets. So I've been kind of getting into that, but that's a whole other kind of offshoot. I also love everything Stephen Forrest does. I love his books. I think they're really accessible. And then I love anything that's like more niche.
Yeah.
That's like really specific. You know, like sometimes I'll be like, I need to get into like a lot, like I've been reading a lot about Neptune.
Mm.
So I like, any book about Neptune. I've been looking at the history of photography by Neptune waves, because Neptune rules photography and Pisces rules photography. And, Neptune's in Pisces for the first time since like spiritualism and photography were, I don't know if invented is the right word, but so I've been kind of looking at like a lot of Neptunian stuff and the Neptune waves. So yeah, those are kind of the books that come to mind. If I was at home, I could look at my my library, because I don't know, but I just really like something that's extremely specific. I love anything having to do with like past life astrology. It's interesting to think about like also how a chart, I feel like I'm jumping all over the place, but it's also interesting to look at like how a chart continues, like transits after someone dies. If it's like someone's book has been republished 50 years after they die, and it's interesting to look at those transits. Yeah, I think those are all the books I can think of off the top of my head. Demetra George, I'm really in love with Demetra George's work.
Yeah, she's great. I just bought my first ticket ever to go to NORWAC this year. So that's the Northwest Astrology Conference, and I'm gonna do her workshop on the front end. So
cool.
Very excited to meet the lady herself. Cool. Yeah. So I'm always curious what people find is like what do you think in your mind like is the best use of astrology? Like when someone comes to you for a reading, like what are you hoping that they get out of it?
Yeah, I mean, I hope that people come away from a reading with me feeling inspired, empowered. I think of it as like it's a weather report. And it's not like anything is definitely going to happen, but it's like, okay, this is like probably the weather you're going to be dealing with, but you can look at it through this lens. I like thinking about it in terms of like knowing that there's going to be an end to something that's hard, especially like a Saturn transit. Sometimes I'll be like, okay, I'm having this Saturn thing, but I'm going to put it on my calendar that it ends at this time. So whether or not it's actually affecting me, I mean, I believe it is, but it's also kind of like a reminder to myself to be like, well, on May 9th, we're going to stop worrying about this so much, or we're going to try to look at it in like a different way. So I think of it as like, yeah, like a lens to see things through. And it's kind of, I work a lot with tarot too, and I don't really work with tarot to like predict things, but I do ask it questions so that I can look at whatever I'm asking about, maybe in a way that I wasn't thinking of. Or like if I'm doing a reading with astrology, I'll also use like astrology oracle cards sometimes, so I can pull the cards and be like, oh, I'm, like what am I missing? And a lot of times it's like really funny, and it'll like the cards will come up of things I've already been talking about the whole reading. So I feel like it is in some way, I mean, I know that astrology is more of a science, but I also use a lot of intuition with astrology, and I do feel like it is an opportunity to sit down with ourselves, our higher selves, and our spirit guides, our ancestors, or whoever you want to invite, and ask for some clarity. Or ask like, how should I be thinking about this? Or what do I need to keep in mind? As opposed to like, oh, this is definitely going to happen. Like, and also, I try to keep it on the positive. I know there's plenty of astrologers that are like, you're in for doom and gloom. And I just don't think that that's helpful. And I really think that like the way that we like our mindset about things actually influences what the reality is. That isn't to say that like if something horrible is happening, it's because you have a horrible mindset. But I do feel like it's easier for me to be like, okay, well, like for instance, Jupiter is going through my second house right now. So I'm having this huge sewer problem in my house. It's going to be wildly expensive, and it's really bumming me out. And I keep trying to be like, okay, well, maybe I'll look back And because now I have to find a way to make a ton more money, maybe I'll look back and be like, oh, if that sewer line hadn't exploded and I had to come up with tens of thousands of dollars, I wouldn't be a multi-millionaire right now. Or they wouldn't have found hidden treasure buried in my yard, which is what I'm expecting will happen. So anyway,
Yeah.
I just try to see it as more of like a, let's try to find ways to use the tools that we have the best we can. And if some of those tools are more of like a hand crank situation, like how can that be seen as the asset that it is? And I just, whenever people do readings with me, a lot of times they're like, oh my God, I have always felt like, especially for people with like 12th house stuff,
Mm.
I've always been like, oh, I just thought I'm so slow, or I take longer on things and I feel bad about that. I'm like, don't feel bad. Like it just says right here, you need extra time alone or sleep or time away or whatever the 12th house wants. And I think it's really cool to see people feel validated and understood and seen, especially about stuff that, like we were talking about in Britt and LaRue's class, that they feel some shame around or feel like it's a shortcoming. So yeah, I think those are all the things that I like about astrology. And I kind of love like looking at like the Picatrix and getting real nerdy about like, I want to make a talisman. I just love anything where you have to like follow directions or follow a recipe. And you kind of get to do that with astrology. I especially love a complicated recipe. And I feel like that is sort of what astrology is in a lot of ways.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I love so much of what you said. I think there's like something there that was coming up for me about how it's still divination and it's still like tapping into this something else, but having like the cookbook there, or like having like a language to access it. I'm losing my train of thought where I was going with that, but there's something about I think, at least for me, that has helped by having like this maybe like scientific type framework to be able to like tap into something that is like less scientific or less scientific than maybe it seems like on the surface or something. I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah, super helpful in that way.
I'm gonna grab a sweater. Hold on.
Oh yeah, no problem.
Okay, I'm back.
So tell me more about running your shop. What is that like for you?
Yeah, so I started in 2017. I wanted a space to have an artist residency and events. I started looking for the space right before the election in 2016, when it felt like we were on the edge of something, which now we know we were. I guess we are always on the edge of something, but I was really like, I've lived in Minneapolis for most of my life. I also lived in Boston and New York, and I came back and I was like, wow, Minneapolis has changed so much, even in the 10 years since I've been back. And it just feels like some of the old Minneapolis was like going away, particularly like artist run spaces.
Mm.
And I really wanted a space that like was a place for artists that are interested in magic. I was missing community after moving back from Boston, where I was going to a spiritualist church on a regular basis, and I had that kind of community. And so I made a list of everything that I wanted, which, since it was an artist residency, I was like, I need a place that's a bedroom, and I need a place with a shower, and ideally I want it within walking distance of my house, which is kind of a tall order because I live in Powderhorn, which isn't the most commercial. I was like, ideally I want a landlord with radical politics. Like I had some like kind of big asks, and then I found, this is the only place I looked at and it fit all of those requirements. And then I was like, oh, now I actually have to do it. When you like get everything you asked for. And when I was shown this space, my landlord said he showed it to one other person, and he told me that Prince's costumes were made in the space in the 80s. And so I was like, okay. So I took a magical bath and I was like, Prince, if you want to help keep Minneapolis weird and magical, help me get the space. And he must have helped because I have had the space since 2017. We opened next door to the place that it currently is. We had the teeniest little store, a space for workshops, It had a kitchen. It had an artist residency. And I was in that space through 2019. And actually, when I was doing that mentorship with Jeff Hinshaw, he was like, oh, you know, the sun's on your Pluto today. Just see like if anything changes your life path. And I was like, nothing's going to change my life. And I went out to lunch with my friend Mary Boo, who had run a yoga studio in the space that the store is currently in. She's like, you know, I just signed a lease, but I don't want it. I need to give up my lease. Would you be interested in taking over my lease? So I was like, yes, because that means that the store can move into an actual store-sized store. Before it was just in like the teeniest little, essentially a closet. So it did change my life path. And so I expanded the business in 2019 so that it's in the space that you were in. I kept the other side. We turned the old store into a spa. We had a tarot reading room. And the spa opened in February of 2020. So that obviously wasn't very long-lived. And then during the pandemic and uprising, we were closed for over a year. I lost all my inspiration. I had a bunch of personally traumatic things happen. Obviously, my neighborhood burning down, and that whole thing wasn't the most inspiring thing on earth. So I let go of the residency side. And I was also like, I need to pull in my scraps of energy and to focus on my own art. So we still have the shop side and have scaled back on our offerings. It is my fantasy at one point to reopen the residency somehow. It would have to be in like a different space. But it definitely made me clarify what the goals were and that I can't say yes to everything. I can't do everything. So yeah, it's kind of funny because when I opened it, it was really to have an artist residency and event space. And I was like, oh, and I'll add a little store to like help pay for it. And now it's a store. And I feel like I'm really good at it. I've worked in customer service most of my life. It's really cool to see how people come here and leave feeling like maybe more empowered or more magical. And like the community that's grown around it has been really cool. When I opened it, I was like, I don't know what I'm doing. I did not go to business school. I put things on a credit card. I didn't take out loans. I didn't have a business plan. I barely did a budget. And I was like, oh, I guess I'm opening a business. And also I was like, I hope people walk through the door in the years that I've signed the lease. So it's cool to see how that has changed and grown. And it's really wild to look back and be like, oh, that was 7 years ago. So yeah. The focus is mainly on, again, like artists working with magic. Everything we sell is made by women, queer, or trans folks. I try to focus on like the more handmade magical stuff. I feel like you can get like mass-produced stuff all over the place. And I love supporting local people, but there's also people like represented from all over the country, and there's a couple artists from like Canada and Croatia. Yeah, so we're open 4 days a week. We used to be open every day. Yeah, I kind of just look back and be like, how did I do all that? So that's where we're at with the future. Yeah.
Yeah, it's really cool. I feel like the collection, I love that it's like very curated. It feels very curated in there, and it's not just like I don't know, like metaphysical shops are great, but it's not just like one that has all of the same stuff that they all have. So I really appreciate that work that you're doing. And yeah, I can't praise it enough. If you're local, you should definitely stop in. And
we have a website too, and we ship thefuturempls.com, but not everything's on it. So like, I don't necessarily put all of the like one-of-a-kind art pieces or ceramics. That kind of stuff isn't in the shop, but most of the stuff is on the website.
Very cool. I'm sure it's hard to keep up like with having an online shop and an in-person one. Like I can't imagine.
Yeah. And some of the stuff I'm just like, someone needs to like encounter it and see it, or I don't want to ship it, or, you know, there's a couple of reasons why I'm like, people have to come in to get the like really unique, like one-of-a-kind pieces.
Totally. Yeah, that makes sense. What else? I feel like I'm like working towards the end of my list. I don't know if I have other questions, but Is there something that you wanted me to ask you that I haven't asked you?
I mean, something I would love to talk about is like my research I'm doing with photo asteroids.
Oh yeah, let's talk about that.
So I got into asteroids because I took Demetra George's asteroid. There was like a three-part asteroid workshop, and I've taken a couple of little asteroid things with her, and I've read her Asteroid Goddesses book, and I just didn't really know about asteroids until I took that workshop with her. And one of the things that really sealed the deal for me about asteroids was that so there's like thousands of asteroids with different names, and you can look up like places and names and ideas and goddesses and all this different stuff. And I had a dog named Vera who I was totally in love with. We were best friends, and my Venus, which is my ruler, is at 5 degrees Aquarius. And I looked up, and the Vera asteroid was at 5 degrees Aquarius. And I was like, oh, well, we were meant to be together. And then I started researching asteroids and going through the list. And I realized that there are 4 asteroids named after photography or inventors of photography. So there's one called Photograpaha. There's one called Talbot, named after William Fox Talbot, who invented the positive-negative photo process on paper. There's one called Daguerre, named after Daguerre, who partially invented the daguerreotype. And then there's one Niepce, who, after Nicephore Niepce, who was working with Daguerre to develop what ended up being the daguerreotype. There's another one that I am somewhat working with called Herschel, named after, I think it's Sir John William Herschel's father. So I haven't used it in everything, but I have used it in like Daguerre's chart. Anyway, so I started doing photographers' charts. And looking and putting the photo asteroids in their chart and seeing where it falls in their chart. And in my chart, the Daguerre asteroid is on my midheaven. And there has been a lot about my career that has to do with like the beginning of photography, daguerreotypes in general. And so I started thinking like, okay, like first of all, what do these asteroids mean? And because my background is in photography and the history of photography, and I've been doing more research about like the photographers' lives and personalities, like no one has defined what these asteroids mean essentially. And so I've been trying to define what each of those asteroids mean, and I have kind of a working idea now of what each of them mean. And so I started offering a reading of like getting the photo asteroids put into your chart and seeing how that might play out for you, especially creatively. And I love doing readings for photographers, but just like for creative people in general, I think it can be helpful. And then also doing like a photograph prescription to be like, well, you should look at these photographers that either share your sun and moon combo or have, for instance, like Daguerre on their midheaven or whatever, like a significant placement with a photo asteroid is. And I think it's a fun way to like find out about new photographers. I think it's an interesting way to look at photographers' work and why they might have been attracted to the subject matter that they were, or why their career maybe was the way that it was, in part because of where the photo asteroids were in their chart, or just what their chart was in general. So that's how I've been nerding out about these photo asteroids, and just kind of, I've looked at like hundreds of photographers' charts and started to find some patterns in where the photo asteroids are placed. And if anyone listening to this has any thoughts on photo asteroids, I haven't really found anyone who is working with them or knows about them. I think this is where I'm like, get my like 2 super niches have like overlapped. But yeah, I've been really excited to talk with you about this and just kind of like start to get the photo asteroid ideas out there, in terms of like, if you're a photographer, which I feel like everyone is now that we all have like, phones, but also just like people I feel like are revisiting film. And I feel like if you're a creative person, you can look at those photo asteroids and kind of get a sense of like, oh, like here's where I might be misunderstood, or here's where I need to lean more into it, or like, if one of them is falling in the 4th house, well, maybe like look at pictures of your ancestors or whatever it is. But I just think it's a fun way to interact with photography through the lens of astrology.
I love that. That's so cool. That's that's amazing. The asteroids are crazy with how many there are and how like hyper niche you can get with them. Like I think even I mean this is not off topic a little bit, but in one of the group chats I'm in, somebody was like looking at the like Milton asteroid and like Helene asteroids with the hurricanes going on. No, that's like you're sparking so many ideas. But that's really cool. How do you see them like playing out in your chart if you want to share?
Yeah, I mean, so specifically Daguerre is on my midheaven. Do you mind if I take a second to pull up my chart so I know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, no, not at all.
Okay. Hold on. I just want to see where all the placements are.
Yeah.
I just do this on astro.com too. And like all of the asteroids are on there. It's totally free. Anyone can do it. It's fun to play around, to play around with the list of asteroids. But let me see. Okay, so I've got Daguerre. It's not on my midheaven. Sorry, it's conjunct my sun.
Nice.
And then Talbot is conjunct my Pallas Athena, which I see as an asteroid having a lot to do with creativity. And those are like the 2 asteroids that are, I follow Demetra George's rules of like the orb to use. And so those are the 2 asteroids in my chart that are like interacting with something significant. Yeah. And the Daguerre asteroid is in my 11th house. And I do a lot of my artwork is public or like for the people. And it is also so much about like influencing the future. Like, 11th house is like hopes, wishes, dreams, the group, the network, society, building the future. And I do feel like all of my work is about that or encompasses that in some way. And I also think of the Daguerre asteroid as, so Louis Daguerre announced that he had invented photography in 1839. And I see that asteroid as like how you have the confidence to put your art out there, even if it's not like fully formed or finished. And I think a lot about like that in terms of showing my art. My South Node is an Aquarius, and my Daguerre is an Aquarius, and my Sun's an Aquarius, and my Venus is an Aquarius. And so I think a lot about like, I feel like one of the things that Aquarius has to learn is like being more seen or allowing themselves to take credit or not just like blending into the wallpaper to do things for everyone else. And so I think in terms of like, like Daguerre, before he was inventing photography, and like Daguerre and Niepce, this is super photo nerdy, but Daguerre and Niepce go together because Niepce was actually developing the process. And then Daguerre kind of like tracked him down and was like, let's be friends. I want to know about your process. And then kind of like they paired up, but Niepce died, and then Daguerre took it and ran and added his own stuff. But like had Niepce lived, it might have been called the Niepce, like Niepceograph or whatever you want to call it, but or Niepce type. But anywho, Daguerre was like he did like these like panorama it wasn't like a light show, but it was like paintings that had light elements to them. So it was like before there were movies, like people would go to this thing that was like there's like optical illusions, and like they wanted it to believe it's real, and also that's all they'd seen, so it can be real if that's all you've seen. And he was like kind of like a showman and really good at talking things up. But then his panorama burned down, and because of that, he kind of had to find a way to make money. So he really focused more on the photography. And he was a Scorpio, and I think a lot about that being like this Plutonian, like burning down your life, or having an aspect of your life burned down so that something can rise up out of the ashes. And at the time, it's really painful. And then you look back and you're like, oh my God, like we don't talk about Daguerre because of his like panoramas. We talk about Daguerre because he was one of the inventors of photography. And so anyway, this is a long-winded way of saying, I think about like in my art making, like where there have been like the versions of like things burning down, so that I can look back and be like, oh, if I wouldn't have like let go of this part of my art making, this other thing would have been born. Or if I wouldn't have let go of the control of being in the darkroom and having things have to be perfect, I wouldn't have allowed for like the imperfections that come up, or like being in collaboration with the process instead of trying to like control the process. And then in terms of like this Pallas Athena asteroid, there's so many aspects of it, but the one that I really like is like how we're creative, and it's in my 12th house. And it's in Aries, but my Talbot is in Taurus, so they're conjunct but out of sign. And I think about like that, like a lot with my creativity is like, let's do it right now. Like I have to make all this stuff right now, which is so Aries. And then like the Talbot is so in Taurus is so like, let's go slow. Let's make sure we actually want to spend money on these supplies, like all that kind of thing. And then also Talbot, the asteroid, I think of as like, you know, Talbot was also inventing photography at the same time, but just was late to the game to announce that he had invented it. And he also kind of didn't care all that much that he was beat to, like that wasn't his whole identity. So I also think about like when I was in art school and I graduate, you know, I got my BFA, and then I remember it was like spring and looking around and being like, did you know there's other things in the world besides photography? There's like trees, and like it was just like I was so all consumed that I feel like my Talbot asteroid reminds me, like he was into so many different things. He was an Aquarius, and so he was into like science and plants, and he was in the government, and he was like, just like photography was one of the things he did. And also at the time, like people are like, oh, this process you invented, it's not like as detailed as the daguerreotype, like, But because of his process, which he invented the negative and positive, that's what photography was built on until digital photography. And so it's also kind of a reminder that like sometimes we don't always know our impact, or like we don't know how like our work is going to hit, and we might not ever know, but just to keep doing it because you like doing it and not because like you're, you know, I just feel like the Talbot asteroid reminds us like to do what you are interested in, not really try to please anyone else but yourself.
That's so cool. There's so much there. Wow, that's beautiful. Yeah, I don't even know what to say after that, but that's no, that's cool. I love like the layers and yeah, just the meaning and takeaway from all of that. I don't know. Yeah, I spent time in art school, not a BFA program, but just at the University of Minnesota, and I spent a lot of time in the dark room. So I have appreciation for that work, and I'm definitely going to look up those asteroids now in my chart.
Yeah, I can send you the numbers that they are to put into your chart. There's also photographica, which I think of as like how more generally like how you're photographing, or if you are a person that is photographed a lot, like a lot of famous people who get their pictures taken a lot have photographica asteroid prominent in their chart. And what else was I gonna say? Oh, then the other photo asteroid is Neops, which like I think of as like how we're working behind the scenes that no one might ever know about. And in some ways, like I think of a little bit as like the wound of where we're maybe creatively wounded, and that's just because of like Niepce's story, and that he kind of is seen as like he got kind of fucked over by Daguerre, or his brother kind of thought that. Or it's also interesting to look at like the I don't know if the word is mystique around photography, but like the story that gets built up and the stories that keep being retold and how that can get worked out. And anyway, if you do your your photo asteroids and you want to talk about it, I am here. But it's also interesting just to think about photography in general, because I think so much about the 12th house being like, when I think about the 12th house, I think about being in a dark room, or how like the 12th house is not digital photography. Like you have to wait for things to develop. You have to give it time for things to be revealed. You have to be in the darkness and let your eyes adjust to know what you're looking at. Like, I just think there's so much like analogy between the dark room and night. Then like, you know, I guess now silver gelatin or darkroom photography could also be considered 1920, you know, alternative photography or antiquated photography. But like how much of that is related to the 12th house, which obviously the 12th house in astrology has been around a lot longer than photography, but now that we have photography, there's so many similarities. And because I'm a 12th house person, my moon's in the 12th house, my Chiron's there, like I just think a lot about the 12th house. And then plus photography, it's like, oh yeah, at least here's some like ways of thinking about it, because I've spent so much time in the darkroom that like it's easy to get lost in time, even that you're looking at the clock all the time. And to think about like how to interpret my 12th house or think about the 12th house, I think a lot about photography.
Yeah. Yeah, that's so cool. How do you feel like, because you said something earlier about like Neptune and photography and like this being, you know, the Neptune return of photography essentially. Like, how do you feel like that has been going, and like where do you see things going with it moving into Aries?
Yeah, I mean, you know, there's so much with Neptune that's like what's real, what's not real. And when photography was invented, it, you know, like some people couldn't even like see it, you know, it's like one of those things where if you don't, it's like, is it even real? Is it even there? Like your eyes have to adjust to like seeing it or believing it. And also at the time, people were like, oh, like a camera took it, it must be real. And I think that now we're in an era with images that's like, well, you know, we have like all these deep fakes and we have AI and we have all this stuff that's like, well, what's real information? Like what's real visual information when anything can be created to and said it's real. And it's something that like we're dealing with, you know, like on social media or the news or any of this stuff that's like, well, what is actually like the real thing? Because how do we prove that this image is true? And that's something that like people have been talking about throughout photography, is like how can we trust, even during the Civil War, like how can we trust that these pictures were taken and not staged? And it's like, well, yeah, a lot of the pictures were staged, but that doesn't mean they're not real. But that also means that like an artist intervened, or like someone with an agenda intervened, or someone who wants you to like see this picture as meaning in a certain way. And I think now at least people are aware that not everything is real and hopefully have more of a critical eye. But it's really hard to sift through it. And then also this idea of like, does it matter if it's real?
Right.
Which is also something like, this is kind of getting off topic, but like, especially for art, I feel like this, or kind of like going back to spiritualism too, of like, even if something isn't real, like sometimes that helps you get to the real thing. Or it's sort of like in seances, sometimes the medium would do a little trick or have to fake. It's almost like you have to fake it till you make it, but then the trick invites in the real spirit, or like it invites in the real thing. So it's sort of like, yeah, I think this Neptune is so murky about what reality is that it's almost like when Mercury is in Pisces, like, I don't even know if it's worth trying to figure out what reality is until we get to Aries.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know about the photography aspect of Neptune and Aries, but I am curious to see what happens.
Yeah.
I don't know, but you know, like we had the Civil War.
Yeah.
Neptune was in Aries, so I'm curious. And Neptune is a wave, and you know, it's more of a generational thing. And so when I think about Neptune, you know, like it's easier to look at it as like, what wave are we getting swept up in? Like, I don't feel like we get to drive that wave, but I do think that this Neptune and Pisces, when people have gotten so much more open spiritually, I feel like part of being open spiritually is being open to other people and like looking at like all of this mutual aid that's been happening in the past. I mean, it's always been happening, but I feel like people have been focusing on it more in the past several years. And people who had a belief in like the government's ability to take care of us, like during the pandemic, I started to see that crumble in people who weren't already there. And so like, I do think that this Neptune and Pisces moment of us getting more in tune with our intuition and people talking about boundaries, like having Saturn in Pisces, I think has been really helpful for people talking about like having boundaries or what does that mean? And I feel like that's going to set us up for whatever Neptune and Aries brings, and hopefully like holding on to some of that, like knowing that rest is part of the revolution and knowing that bringing your spirituality, whatever that is, or your intuition, or like bringing that into whatever this next wave is going to be. Obviously, like every sign has something to teach the next one. And I'm curious how we're going to suss out like reality, or like what is reality once Neptune hits Aries.
Me too. I'm a Pisces rising, so it's been in my first house this whole time. And so it's like only recently that I've been like, I'm also in a first house year and I have Saturn there. So there's like a lot going on, but like very unclear, like what's going on? What has this all been about? And like, you know, you kind of think you know, but you also, it's like, do I really know? Like, I can't even, I feel like this year I've spent time trying to figure out like what my style is, or like what I like to wear, like how I want my hair to be. And I'm getting close to hitting the second house year and I don't know. So I feel like I've chalked up a lot to Neptune. One of my good astrologer friends recently was talking about Neptune in a way that I loved, about how, you know, it can be like this fog that like clouds things, but like one of the ways we can help to see through the fog, or like to help ourselves when we're stuck in the fog, is to kind of like, if we turn around and look back to like the path that we cleared when we were coming through it.
Interesting.
I don't know, that was just such a good visual, I felt like, of like how to kind of like see your way through the fogginess.
Yeah.
But maybe
that's interesting, because I think about the fog a lot when it comes with Neptune, and like when you're in a fog, you can't trust your like or you can't trust your sight, at least, because you can't see anything. And so you kind of have to be like, well, I have to trust my intuition, or that feeling of like when you're in the dark and about to walk into a wall, like that just feeling that the wall is there, even if you haven't touched it yet, like having to amplify your other senses. But I really like that idea of looking back. So you already know where you've been. And even if that's kind of surrounded by fog, at least you like made it that far into the fog.
Right. Yeah. So interesting. Neptune. When I talk about it with clients, it's kind of like, this planet is hard to describe because that's its nature. And it's, you know, I go further than that, but like that's one of the things I like to make sure to mention because it's so slippery. I don't know.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for sharing. I feel like this is such a rich episode and so much information. Like I feel like I'm going to take away personally from this, but yeah, thank you for being here.
Thank you so much for having me. This is so fun to talk with you.
Yes. Do you want to tell people where they can find your work?
Yeah, so my astrology website is Silver Rising Astrology. I just released a Jupiter retrograde kind of mini reading. It's like a half an hour reading because Jupiter is retrograde today till February. So I thought, it's a nice kind of check-in around before you keep growing, like where do you want to grow into? So silverrisingastrology.com. I also have an Instagram that I sparsely post on and a newsletter. And then the future is thefuturempls.com. On Instagram, it's thefuturempls. And then I have a personal website, which I just redid that has all my art on it. And that's my name, laceyprpicchedtke.com. And I feel very excited because I have got Mercury and Mars in Pisces, and I am not a computer whiz, but I redid my whole website and it looks like I am alive again. At least I'm in the 20th century.
Nice. Well, I will link to that in the show notes. So
Thanks. I'll text you those too.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great. All right. Well, thank you. I'll talk to you soon.
Okay, thanks. Take care.
You too. So that was an awesome episode. Just listening to it back a little bit here and kind of still just in awe of Lacey and all of the cool work that she's done. I say the word cool many times, but I mean it in the most sincere way. I hope that comes through because, yeah, sometimes I don't always know what to say when I'm just taking it all in. So thanks for bearing with my neurodivergence there. But yeah, I wanted to just make sure I got everybody all of Lacey's info, and just to reiterate how inspired I am by the work she's doing. I think there are so many astrologers who are doing so much cool work. Some people are doing it like really publicly and putting it all over the internet, and that's great. But then there's so many astrologers who I've never heard of until, I met Lacey just kind of by chance by her hosting this workshop. And I'm just in awe of like this whole body of work that she has, and also like this research that she's just doing, especially in relation to the photography asteroids that she talks about. It's just very inspiring to me to know that I can do that too. And I hope that feels the same for other people listening, because there's just endless possibilities with astrology. That's what I love about the medium of astrology, is that there's just many different ways that you can go, a million different directions you can go in, and explore, and that there's more than enough for everyone, and everybody's gonna have their own spin on it. And yeah, I think that's really fucking cool. All right, so I want to make sure everybody gets her info. I have it all up here on the screen. You can find Lacey's website, where I think she has most of her art on this website, is laceyprpichhedtke.com. You can find her on Instagram there at Lacey Prpic Hedtke. You can find the website for her shop if you are interested in ordering any of the cool stuff that she talked about at thefuturempls.com. And then the future is on Instagram as at thefuturempls. And then you can find her astrology website, where you can book with Lacey, at silverrisingastrology.com, and her Instagram for that is at silverrisingastrology. She's got this really cool Jupiter retrograde reading that she mentioned. I might have to get one of those because that also sounds very cool. But yeah, check it out. I'll have the graphic for that with more info also in the show notes.
And I will be sure to include the asteroid numbers because I had to go look those up. She sent them to me and I had to like plug them in immediately into astro.com to check where they are in my chart. So if that's piquing your interest, definitely check that out on astro.com. For more information about my work, you can find me at byjoveastrology.com, on Instagram at byjoveastro, and on Twitter at byjoveastrology.